"Don't touch her. You'll scare the baby," Ruth's daughter-in-law said. Ruth Hemmings froze, then smiled. 3 weeks later, her daughter-in-law's name vanished from every trust, will, and guardianship paper in the safe. By summer, the law would protect Ruth's granddaughter and make Dana powerless to stop it. No shouting, no scenes, just the quiet, irreversible kind of justice. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Her voice cracked with disgust. Ruth's cracked with something older, the kind of fracture that lives in the marrow. The November chill still clung to Ruth's coat as she stepped into Dana's entryway. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish, undercut by a synthetic floral note, the kind of fragrance meant to impress visitors, not welcome them. She hadn't seen Evie in 2 weeks, and anticipation had been building in her chest since she turned onto this street. Across the open-plan living room, Evie spotted her. The toddler's face lit up, curls bouncing as she toddled forward, arms outstretched in a pure, unfiltered greeting. Ruth's arms opened in instinct, ready to wrap around the child and breathe in that warm, milky scent she'd missed. Dana's voice cut in like glass against silk. "Don't hug the baby," she said. "You look scary when you cry." The words landed with surgical precision. Ruth hadn't realized there were tears in her eyes until they were pointed out, named and shamed. Evie faltered mid-step, confusion washing over her small face. Her arms dropped. The smile collapsed into a closed-lip uncertainty that didn't belong on a 2-year-old. Ruth's own arms fell to her sides. The moment, fragile as spun sugar, shattered. Miles stood in the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, gaze fixed on nothing. If he'd heard the exchange, he gave no sign. Dana, already looking back at her phone, scrolled with quick, businesslike swipes, her attention vacuum sealed away. The visit limped forward. Ruth sat cross-legged on the floor, while Evie stacked blocks nearby, careful not to lean against her. The sound of plastic clinking against wood filled the silence. Ruth asked about the tower. Evie nodded without looking up. When it came time to leave, Dana tossed a perfunctory drive safe over her shoulder. Miles offered a thin smile before disappearing into the hallway. Outside, the air bit at Ruth's cheeks. The driveway seemed longer on the walk back. By the time she slid into the driver's seat, the steering wheel felt cold enough to sting her hands. She drove in silence, the radio untouched, the road ahead a blur of gray pavement and bare-limbed trees. Her bungalow greeted her with stillness. The faint scent of lavender detergent lingered in the air, the same one her husband had favored for his sweaters. She went straight to the coat rack and reached for his cardigan, the thick cable-knit one that still held a suggestion of his shape. Pulling it on felt like sealing herself inside an embrace that didn't flinch. At the kitchen table, she opened her journal. Her handwriting came in a steady, deliberate flow, not about anger, but about erasure. About the slow, quiet process of being moved from the center of a life to its outer margin. How love could be discouraged not with loud denials, but with small repeated barriers, until a child learned not to reach for her at all. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Even the refrigerator's hum seemed muted. Ruth paused, staring at the words until they blurred. Then she rose and walked down the hallway to her study. The fireproof safe sat against the far wall, unremarkable in appearance, but heavy with the weight of decades' worth of decisions. She keyed in the code and opened it, revealing folders in tidy stacks. Her will, insurance documents, guardianship papers drafted the year Evie was born. She carried them to the desk, the papers spread out in front of her like a hand of cards she'd been holding far too long. From the pen jar, she took a red felt tip. The ink was thick, almost glossy, as she circled Dana's name with one slow, unbroken line. The paper didn't tear, but the tip bit into the fibers just enough to leave a faint indentation. She set the pen down, the circle staring back at her like an eye that had just opened. It wasn't a thought. It was the beginning of something irreversible. It was there, pressed between two brittle sheets of onion skin paper in the old cedar box, the hospital's embossed seal still faintly gold. Mother, Ruth Ann Hemmings. She traced the letters with her thumb, the paper warm from her hand. In her mind the years dissolved. She was 23 again, standing in the cramped bedroom of a one-bedroom apartment, the wallpaper peeling in one corner. Outside, winter wind rattled the thin glass. Dana had been 2 days old, wrapped in a faded pink blanket the nurses had let her take home. The baby's head fit perfectly in the crook of her arm, impossibly light yet anchoring her in ways nothing else ever had. Ruth sang, not well, but softly, a half-forgotten lullaby her own mother used to hum while folding laundry. No one else had been there. No cameras, no announcements, just her and the child. The smell of warm milk and baby powder had filled that tiny room. She could almost feel the heat of Dana's cheek against her collarbone even now, decades later. A shiver worked through her, not from cold but from the gap between then and now. She returned the birth certificate to the box and moved to the closet, pulling down the stack of photo albums so heavy the leather cracked when she opened them. Out spilled her life's evidence, Dana's toothless grins, first day of school outfits Ruth had sewn herself, birthday cakes balanced on kitchen counters still cluttered with mail. Her handwriting looped under each picture in blue ballpoint pen, dates, ages, little notes. She dug deeper into the bottom drawer of the linen chest, until her fingers found the quilt. Evie's quilt. Pale yellow squares, hand-stitched with tiny embroidered ducks. The edges were frayed from 2 years of loving use, before Dana stopped bringing it out. Ruth pressed it to her face. It smelled only of cotton now, the newborn scent long gone. She folded it neatly, though her hands trembled. The realization came with the kind of clarity she hated. She'd become the background. Not even the furniture. Furniture is used. She was the old prop wheeled out for the occasional photograph, then tucked away. She remembered too vividly Dana saying, "It's just easier when she bonds with Mywell's mom. She's more modern." The pause before modern had been the smallest knife. By mid-afternoon, Ruth needed air. She drove to the corner diner, where the windows fogged in winter and the coffee tasted like the 70s. Pastor Lowell was already in his usual booth, flipping through a dog-eared devotional. He looked up as she slid in. "Haven't seen you here in a bit." She didn't bother with small talk. "Do people just decide when you stop mattering?" He studied her for a moment, then set his cup down. "Only if you let them." A faint smile. "You still hold the pen, Ruth." She thought about that for a moment, the word pen ringing in her mind like a bell. When the waitress refilled her coffee, Ruth kept her eyes on the steam curling above the mug. She didn't want him to see the way her jaw had set. Back home, the light had shifted to late-day amber, streaking across her study. She sat at the desk, the quilt folded beside her, the birth certificate on top of the album. Her phone was within reach. Her thumb hovered over the screen only a moment before she typed the message. "Do you have Ellie Brandt's updated number?" She hit send without reading it back. The phone vibrated once in her hand. The reply was almost instant. She banned her from hugs. Ruth brewed one into a legal strategy. The bell above the cafe door chimed as Ruth stepped inside, the smell of fresh espresso and cinnamon rolls curling around her like a warmer kind of welcome. Outside, Cedar Falls was locked in late November gray, but here the light glowed honey-soft against brick walls. Ellie Brandt was already at the corner table, coat draped over the chair, pen tapping against a yellow legal pad. She didn't waste a handshake. "Tell me everything," she said the moment Ruth sat down. Ruth wrapped her fingers around the coffee cup the waitress set down, drawing in the heat before speaking. She didn't rush. She began with the driveway silences, the intercepted embraces, the way Dana's voice could flatten a moment with a single remark. "She treats me like I'm not." Here Ruth said finally, "Like I'm just furniture in the room until she wants to move me." Ellie's eyes didn't flick away, not even when Ruth's voice caught. She took notes in brisk, looping strokes. "You know," she said after a pause, "you have full legal guardianship fallback for Evie if anything happens to Dana or Miles. It's in your old will." Ruth blinked. "I know." Ellie leaned in. "Do you want to change it?" The answer came without the space of a breath. Yes. And I want it to be airtight. The waitress refilled their coffee. The hiss of the espresso machine filled the space between sentences. Ellie's pen was already moving again. We'll draft a new guardianship transfer. Remove Dana from medical and financial authority over you. Update your power of attorney. And we'll add asset transfer protections so she can't contest the trust later. Ruth listened to the list the way a patient might listen to a treatment plan after years of the wrong diagnosis. You'll need Tomas Hale to align the financials, Ellie added. He's still your advisor? 40 years, Ruth said, a flicker of a smile. He was at Dana's christening. Ellie pulled out her phone, tapping in a quick message. Then we start now. No gaps, no loopholes. If she tries to challenge, she'll hit a wall she can't see over. The murmur of other conversations filled the cafe. A couple by the window debating holiday plans. A man reading a newspaper with a soft whistle under his breath. None of it touched their table. Ruth reached for her wallet, but Ellie waved her off. This one's on me. Consider it the first brick in your fortress. They stepped outside together. The air was sharper now, the kind that found the space between scarf and collar. A gust lifted Ruth's silver curls across her cheek. She stopped on the sidewalk, turned toward Ellie, and without thinking, stepped forward. Her arms wrapped tight around the other woman, not in desperation, but with deliberate strength. Ellie didn't flinch. Make this irreversible, Ruth said against her ear. When she stepped back, her breath hung in the cold between them like a vow. The visit began with rules. Dana met her at the door, one arm braced against the frame as if holding back a draft. Living room only today, she said. We're reorganizing. Ruth stepped inside, the scent of air freshener clashing with the faint undertone of reheated food. The living room had been staged like a magazine spread. Decorative pillows perfectly fluffed, no toys in sight. Dana gestured to the armchair by the window, as if assigning her a seat in a waiting room. Through the archway, Ruth could see the hum of family life happening without her. Miles stacking mail on the kitchen counter. Evie's voice chirping from somewhere down the hall. Then the small feet came pounding across the hardwood. Evie rounded the corner, face bright, and crashed into Ruth's knees with the pure force of a toddler's love. Ruth's hands went instinctively to the child's hair, soft and still carrying the faint scent of baby shampoo. Don't encourage clinginess, Dana said from the doorway, voice light but edged. Ruth only nodded. Her smile measured. She let Evie sit against her legs while they arranged plastic blocks on the carpet between them. She asked nothing about the kitchen, about the closed-off rooms. She only watched, listened, stored every word and gesture in the place where she now kept her ammunition. Later that night, in the quiet of her bungalow, she opened her journal and wrote it down. Every line, every pause, every way love had been discouraged as though it were a bad habit. 2 days later, Ellie called to say the First Amendment had been filed. Dana's name was gone from all medical and financial decision-making authority. She can't sign for you now, Ellie said. Not in a hospital room, not in a bank, not anywhere. It was a start. Thomas Hale came by the following week, the familiar smell of his aftershave preceding him into the kitchen. He spread the paperwork across her table, explaining how they'd begin rerouting her funds into a trust for Evie, one Dana could never touch. This way it's locked in, he said, tapping the figures. Monthly reinvestments automatic, no withdrawals except for her education. Ruth signed with steady hands. That night, she took out her sewing basket. The fabric for the new baby quilt was softer than the one she'd made before, pale blue with tiny constellations stitched into each square. She sewed her lawyer's initials into the corner, a private joke she didn't bother to explain to anyone. Every stitch was an act of quiet reclamation. Not for Dana. For the little girl who still ran to her without hesitation, for now. A week later, her phone lit up with a text from Dana. No more surprise visits. We'll let you know when you can see her. The screen's light reflected in Ruth's glasses as she read it twice, then once more for the rhythm of the words. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Some doors shut with a click you can barely hear. Others slam. This one locked. They took away her rights to love, so she wrote them out with a pen. The papers were spread across Ellie Brandt's desk like a map of territory about to be claimed. The blinds were half drawn, stripes of winter light cutting across Ruth's hands as she held the pen. Her knuckles looked smaller these days, the veins more visible, but her grip didn't tremble. "No more waiting for kindness that doesn't come," Ruth said. Ellie's gaze was steady. "Then we'll put it in writing." The new document slid across the desk. Full legal transfer of guardianship fallback. Dana's name was nowhere. In its place, Claire Hemmings Caro, Ruth's cousin in Vermont. The woman ran a small farm, had 3 grown children with college degrees, and a reputation in her county for showing up to every school board meeting. "She's solid," Ellie said, tapping the page. "The kind of record judges like to see." Ruth read every line, not because she didn't trust Ellie, but because she wanted to feel the weight of each sentence as it moved Dana further from Evie's future. The signature line waited like a threshold. She signed in blue ink, slow and deliberate. Ellie capped the pen for her. "We'll keep it sealed unless something happens. But legally?" She leaned back in her chair. "Dana's out." The finality of the words settled in Ruth's chest like a warm stone. From there they moved quickly. Hospital records were updated. Emergency contacts changed. Insurance files recoded. The living trust amended so that in the event of Ruth's passing, Dana had no control over assets, guardianship, or even funeral arrangement. By the time Ruth left Ellie's office, the workday traffic was just beginning to clog Main Street. She stopped at the corner bakery, bought a single cinnamon roll, and ate it in her car with the windows rolled up. The sugar stuck to her fingertips. She licked it off without guilt. 2 days later, Pastor Lowell knocked at her door. He stepped inside, brushing snow from his coat, and Ruth led him to the kitchen table where the signed and notarized papers lay. He read without comment, flipping each page carefully. When he finished, he rested a hand on the stack. "You just baptized your freedom," he said. She smiled faintly. "Feels more like a funeral." "Sometimes they're the same thing," he replied. The call from Dana came that evening. No greeting, just the clipped sound of irritation. "Please don't bring that ugly old toy when you visit. It freaks Evie out." Ruth pictured the ugly old toy, a cloth rabbit she'd stitched the night Dana was born. The ears were worn thin from decades of small hands. She let the silence stretch, just enough for Dana to fill it with a huff. "That'll be hard," Ruth said finally, her voice even. "You just lost visitation." There was a pause on the other end, the kind where the air itself seems to stall. "What?" Dana's voice sharpened. Ruth didn't explain. She ended the call, set the phone face down on the table, and reached for her tea. Outside, snow had begun to fall, slow, deliberate flakes settling on the hedges. Inside, the papers on her table waited in their neat stack, permanent now, impossible to undo without the consent of someone who would never give it. The signature ink was barely dry, but in the eyes of the law, the shift was already complete. Dana's claim to Evie's future had dissolved, quietly and entirely. No fight, no warning, just the soundless closing of a door that would never open again. The text came in at 7:14 a.m. Before Ruth had finished her first cup of coffee. The screen lit up on the kitchen counter with Dana's name and a tone that was never warm anymore. "Too busy this month for visits, let's regroup in spring." Ruth stared at the words, the casual dismissal wrapped in politeness. Spring was 4 months away. In a 2-year-old's life, that was an era. She set the phone down, not replying. She didn't need to. The calendar Dana had cleared was already being replaced by something far more permanent. That afternoon, Ruth walked into Thomas Hale's office, the trust documents neatly clipped in a manila folder. The place smelled faintly of cedar and printer ink, the same smell it had carried when she'd first opened an account here decades ago. Thomas looked up from his desk, glasses slipping slightly down his nose. "You're sure?" he asked, tapping the folder. "I'm past sure," she replied. He opened it, scanning the final trust paperwork. "Education. housing support, medical expenses, all routed to Evie, bypassing Dana entirely. Once I file this, it's locked. Good, Ruth said. She leaned back in the leather chair, the creak of it almost like an exhale. From there she walked 3 blocks to Ellie's office. The lawyer was already waiting with another document, her updated healthcare proxy. Dana's name was gone, replaced with Ellie's sister Marin, a pediatric nurse. Ruth had met once at a Christmas party. She's calm under pressure, Ellie explained. Doesn't get pushed around in hospitals. You'll like her. I don't have to like her, Ruth said, signing without hesitation. I just have to trust her. On the way home, Ruth stopped for gas and spotted Pastor Lowell in the next lane, hood up on his old Ford. She walked over, her boots crunching in the slush. How's the engine? She asked. Still pretending it's 20 years younger than it is. He grinned faintly. And you? She told him in broad strokes about the changes, about the trust, about the proxy, about how she had cut the last threads Dana could pull if things went wrong. I didn't lose faith, she said quietly. I just stopped worshipping the wrong people. He didn't answer, but his smile carried the kind of approval that didn't need words. That night, scrolling through her phone, Ruth saw Dana's latest post, a family photo. Dana, Miles and Evie in matching sweaters, smiling wide in front of a Christmas tree. The caption read, "Grateful for strong family." Ruth's absence in the frame was as deliberate as the words were pointed. She closed the app. Instead, she set up her old camcorder on the kitchen counter and began recording. The first video was for Evie's 3rd birthday. A simple message about the day she was born, the weather, the way her cry had quieted the moment Ruth held her. When it was done, she labeled the file, slipped it into a small envelope, and wrote year 3 on the front. She made another for year 4. Then year 5. A slow, deliberate archive of love, dated and waiting. By the time the kettle whistled for her evening tea, she had 3 more envelopes stacked beside her. Across town in Ellie's office, the voicemail light on her desk phone blinked red. She pressed play, Dana's voice spilling into the room with an edge sharp enough to cut glass. I heard there was some legal change. My mom better not be screwing around with my kid's future. Ellie listened twice before saving the message to the case file. At Ellie's desk, the document looked unremarkable, just black ink on white paper. But Ruth knew the power it carried. In the box marked Legal Guardian Fallback, the name written was not Claire Hemmings Caro. Instead, it was Claire M. Bishop, Claire's married name. It was a detail Dana had never known, tucked so far into the folds of Claire's life that it might as well have been invisible. Once this is filed, it's sealed, Ellie said, sliding the form across. If anyone goes digging without cause, they'll get a wall of black bars. Ruth signed. The pen moved without pause. The sound of it scratching against paper felt final, almost surgical. 2 days later, the phone rang. Dana didn't bother with preamble. Are you hiding things? That's financial abuse, Mom. Ruth was at her kitchen counter, pouring coffee. She kept her voice even. Nothing's hidden, Dana. You just weren't included. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. Do you even hear yourself? You're cutting yourself off from your own family. I hear myself perfectly. Dana hung up. The dial tone felt more like a door slamming than a disconnection. That afternoon, Ellie forwarded the voicemail Dana had left her the week before, the one dripping with suspicion, to the county clerk's office. Subtle insurance, Ellie said in the email, just in case she tries something messy later. Meanwhile, Thomas Hale was finishing his part of the puzzle. In his office, the computer screen glowed with the final routing setup for Evie's trust. Interest now reinvests automatically, he explained, fingers tapping the keyboard. It grows faster this way, and no one, not even a parent, can redirect it. Ruth nodded. Good. Keep it breathing without her. By the time she left his office, the air outside had turned brittle with the first bite of December. She stopped at the market for overripe bananas, the kind perfect for baking, and spent the evening in her kitchen. The smell of warm bread filled the bungalow, cinnamon drifting into the hallway. The next morning, she wrapped the loaf in wax paper, tied it with string, and carried it across the street to Mrs. Jensen's house. The older woman opened the door in her quilted robe, smiling. "You're spoiling me," Mrs. Jensen said, taking the loaf. "No," Ruth replied, her voice lighter than it had been in weeks. "I'm done being ignored and useful only when convenient." She didn't elaborate, and Mrs. Jensen didn't ask. The mailbox was waiting when Ruth returned home. Among the usual bills and flyers was a large white envelope from a law firm Ruth didn't recognize. She slid it open at the kitchen counter, the paper rasping under the blade. The words inside were direct. Petition for preemptive guardianship, filed by Dana Reed. The claim: deteriorating mental capacity and inability to manage personal affairs. Ruth read it twice, her face unreadable. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches against her window, like knuckles on glass. She set the letter down beside her coffee and reached for her phone. She tried to prove Ruth was unfit. The court proved she was. The letter from Dana's attorney still sat on Ruth's desk, its language clinical and cold, dripping with accusation. Deteriorating mental capacity, inability to manage personal affairs. Words meant to strip her of credibility, her independence, her dignity. When Ruth slid the paper across Ellie's desk, Ellie barely glanced at it before picking up the phone. "We'll do this on our terms," she said, dialing. "I know the right people." By Friday morning, Ruth was sitting in a sunlit office, with cream-colored walls, the faint scent of eucalyptus in the air. Dr. Marla Dorsey, a psychologist Ellie trusted, sat across from her with a clipboard and kind, deliberate eyes. "We're going to take our time," Dr. Dorsey said. "Think of this as a conversation, not a test." They spoke for over 2 hours. About memory, decision-making, how Ruth handled stress. Ruth recounted the events of the last months without dramatics, laying each fact down like a card on a table. She completed problem-solving exercises, named objects, recalled lists backwards. The questions dug deep, but Ruth met each one with a clarity sharpened by years of reading children's faces in her library work, knowing exactly how to reach the truth. After lunch, she went to St. Luke's for the medical half of the evaluation. Blood pressure, reflexes, mobility, blood work. The works. The attending physician, an old acquaintance of Ellie's, smiled when he finished reviewing the results. "You're in better shape than most of my patients 10 years younger." By the next Tuesday, Ellie had both reports in hand. Cognitive function, excellent. Medical capacity, stable. Emotional resilience, high. No signs of impairment. Ellie walked the sealed envelope straight into the courthouse, before Dana's petition could be heard. In the quiet echo of the clerk's office, the file slid into the official record with a satisfying thud. At the hearing the following week, the judge barely hid his irritation as he read from the report. "This motion is unsupported and retaliatory," he said, his voice ringing in the paneled courtroom. "Case dismissed." Ellie didn't look at Dana. She didn't have to. The sound of the gavel was enough. That afternoon, back at her kitchen table, Ruth updated her advance directive. In the section for hospital visitation rights, she wrote in firm, dark ink, "No contact with Dana Reed if hospitalized." It was the kind of sentence that didn't need explanation. Late the next day, Pastor Lowell stopped by. He brought a loaf of bread from the church bake sale and set it gently on her counter. "I heard about the hearing," he said. Ruth poured them both coffee. "You're not scary," he told her. As they sat, "You're the only one telling the truth." She didn't respond right away, letting the warmth of the coffee and his words soak into her. Outside, the light was fading into the bruised blue of early evening. After he left, she was tidying the living room when she caught movement outside her window. A car pulling into her driveway without warning. Her stomach tightened before she even recognized the vehicle. Dana. The driver's door swung open, and Dana stepped out, her coat unbuttoned despite the cold. She walked around to the back seat, opened the door and unbuckled Evie. The little girl's pink hat was crooked, her cheeks flushed from the cold. Ruth froze in the doorway, the air between them taut as a drawn bow. She used the baby as leverage. Ruth used the law as a wall. The cold met her first, sharp enough to make her lungs feel smaller. Ruth stepped out onto the porch, her coat collar turned up, cardigan layered beneath. Down the short walkway, Dana stood beside the idling SUV, steam rising from the exhaust like a signal flare. Evie's small face was visible in the back seat, framed by her crooked pink hat. Dana leaned on the open car door, posture casual but eyes sharp. "Thought I'd give you a chance to explain yourself," she called, the wind tossing strands of hair across her face. Ruth didn't step off the porch. Instead, she lifted her phone, the red record timer already blinking. "We'll keep this clear," she said evenly. Dana's gaze flicked to the phone, her smile tightening. "You're really recording your own daughter?" "I'm documenting," Ruth said. "It keeps people honest." The corner of Dana's mouth curled, but it wasn't amusement. "You've been busy. Talking to church people. Thomas. Who else? You're turning the family against me." "I didn't turn anyone against you," Ruth replied. "You did that every time you shut me out." Evie's muffled voice piped up from the back seat. "Guama." She kicked her legs, eager. Ruth's hand twitched. That old reflex to go to her, but she stayed still. Dana unbuckled the toddler, swinging her onto her hip. "Go ahead," she said, stepping forward. "Hold her. Let's see if you can do it without crying and making her nervous." Ruth kept the phone steady. "I won't. You won't hold her." Dana blinked. "Not like this," Ruth said. "She's not a pawn in whatever this is." A thin, high color spread along Dana's throat. "So now you're refusing your own granddaughter. That's rich." "I'm protecting her," Ruth said quietly. "There's a trust now. She's safe. And so am I." Dana laughed. Short, sharp. "A trust. Pieces of paper don't make you a better grandmother. They make me a responsible one." Wind shivered through the pine trees at the edge of the yard. A dog barked twice down the block, then stopped, listening. Ruth stood still, her coat brushing against her legs, the phone unwavering. "Here's what's going to happen," Dana said finally, shifting Evie to her other hip. "You're going to undo whatever you did with your money people, and you're going to stop telling strangers about our business. If you don't, I'll file again. For everything." Ruth let the silence stretch before answering. "You already filed. The court read your motion. They called it retaliatory." For a flicker of a second, Dana's confidence faltered. She masked it quickly. "You're fragile. Everyone knows it. You call drama love. I'm protecting my child." Ruth inclined her head slightly. "Then stop using her to hurt me." From the car seat, a stuffed rabbit lay slumped on the floor mat, one ear flattened. Ruth saw it, and the memory of sewing those ears years ago pressed against her ribs like a bruise. She looked away before it could settle in her throat. The neighbor across the street slowed on the sidewalk, scarf pulled up to his nose, pretending to adjust it while his eyes flicked between them. This was Cedar Falls. People remembered scenes like this. "No more unannounced visits," Ruth said. "No more using her as a prop. If you need to talk, email Ellie." "Ellie?" Dana scoffed. "What is she, your handler?" "She's my attorney." The word landed flat and cold. Dana clutched Evie tighter, pressing a showy kiss to her cheek. The child squirmed, reaching a mittened hand toward Ruth, but Dana turned back toward the SUV. Ruth kept her feet rooted to the porch, phone steady, recording until the door shut. Buckles clicked, the engine's growl deepened. Before driving off, Dana leaned over the roof. "You wanted a wall? Enjoy it." Ruth didn't reply. She waited until the taillights vanished before unlocking her phone, sending the video to Ellie with a short note. "Unannounced visit. Child leveraged. Please address." The reply came almost immediately. "Drafting restrictions now. No drop-ins. No child as leverage. All communication through counsel." Ruth was rinsing her hands at the sink when her phone buzzed again. Tomas this time. "Got your message," he said. Papers rustled in the background. "After our last adjustments, I went ahead and filed the final instrument." She dried her hands slowly. "Which instrument?" "The big one. The trust is now irrevocable. Not even her parents can touch it." The word irrevocable settled inside her like a key turning in a lock. Outside, the pines swayed in the wind, but the wall was built. Snow still clung to the sidewalks as Ruth stepped into First United Methodist. The air was warm, tinged with evergreen from the wreaths hung along the balcony rail. Candles flickered at the altar, their glow catching on polished brass. She slid into the last pew, far enough back that she could watch without being watched. Up front, Dana and Miles claimed their place in the first row. Dana's hair caught the light like spun gold, her red coat immaculate, her smile fixed just enough to show every tooth. She angled her phone for a selfie, Miles leaning in, Evie perched on his knee. Ruth saw the phone tilt, then the two wide grins, the instant post-service upload waiting in draft. The choir began, voices threading through the high rafters. Ruth let the sound wash over her, not singing, just breathing it in. She felt the difference between performance and presence, Dana in front of the crowd, Ruth in the quiet shadow of the back pew. When Pastor Lowell stepped up to the pulpit, his voice was steady, rich with the cadence of someone who had weathered storms. "There is a kind of strength that makes no noise," he began. "And there is an inheritance that is worth more than money, though sometimes that is the battlefield." Ruth's gaze met his for the briefest moment. The flicker was deliberate. His next words carried an edge meant for both the front and the back. A bitter inheritance poisons the giver and the taker. But a clean one, a peaceful one, leaves no one fighting over scraps of love. In the first row, Dana shifted in her seat, smoothing Evie's hair without looking behind her. The sermon ended with a prayer for truth, for courage, for kindness without pretense. The final hymn rose, voices bright against the gray outside. Ruth stayed through the last note, waiting until the aisle cleared before standing. In the narthex she moved toward the door without stopping at the coffee table or the clusters of chatter. Several older women reached for her hand as she passed. Brief squeezes, pats that said without words, "We see you." She gave each one a small smile in return. Outside, the cold pinched her cheeks. Snowflakes the size of dimes floated down, catching in her hair. She crossed the lot, boots crunching on the salted path, and started her car. The warmth from the heater didn't reach her fingers until she was halfway home. That afternoon, her phone chimed with an email from Ellie. Transcript attached. The subject line read, Ellie had already pulled the sermon from the church's live stream and formatted it for Ruth's case file. "It speaks directly to your stability," Ellie's note said, "and to her behavior." Ruth read the transcript twice. The words were a steady hand at her back. Later that evening, scrolling idly before bed, she saw Dana's new post. A close-up from the front row, Evie nestled between them, Dana's arm around Miles's shoulders. The caption read, "Some people are just too broken to heal. We pray for them." The comments below were full of hearts, prayers and soft accusations disguised as sympathy. Ruth set the phone face down. The screen went black. The next morning, Ellie's desk phone lit up with a call from Dana's attorney. The message they left was brief, their tone clipped. "We're requesting a full accounting of Mrs. Hemming's estate and her complete mental health history for review." Ellie listened twice before saving the message into Ruth's file. Her jaw tightened, not in surprise, but in recognition of the next move on the board. Ellie's office smelled faintly of toner and peppermint tea. Papers fanned across her desk like a dealer's hand, each page a snapshot of 40 years. "If they want numbers," she said, sliding the stack toward Ruth, "we'll give them a complete picture. Not just what you have, what you've given." Ruth adjusted her glasses and looked down at the first sheet. The columns were neat, the totals in bold. Private school tuition for 12 years. A college savings account that paid for Dana's out-of-state degree. The reception hall deposit for Dana's wedding. Ellie flipped the page. "Here's the down payment you gave them for their house." Her pen tapped the figure. "Market rate for that neighborhood now, triple." Ruth's hand stayed steady on the table, but she felt the ache in her knuckles as she turned the page. The next sheet was smaller, more intimate. Receipts for Evie's newborn crib, the stroller, the entire first year's wardrobe. Even the quilt she'd sewn was listed, not because it had a price tag, but because it was part of the story. At the bottom of the page, Ellie had typed one line in italics. 2 weeks after this purchase, Mrs. Hemings was told she could no longer visit unannounced. Ruth let her finger rest on that sentence before setting the page down. "You're sure this will matter? It will show a pattern," Ellie said. "A long history of contribution, followed by exclusion. The court doesn't like that dynamic, especially when they're trying to claim you're unstable." By Thursday, the packet was sent by courier to Dana's attorney, a crisp, bound presentation that left no room for spin. The reply came in silence. No calls, no rebuttals, just a faint shift in the air, like a storm that had decided to skirt the edge of town instead of hitting it head-on. Ellie caught it too. "They're backing off," she said over the phone, "but don't mistake that for them giving up. It's retreat, not surrender." The next call came from Thomas. "We've updated your estate title," he told her. "It's now 100% protected against family contestation. That means no one, and I mean no one, can override it once you're gone." Ruth looked out her window as he spoke, watching a cardinal land on the snow-dusted hedge. The flash of red against white was startling in the stillness. "Good," she said. "Let's keep it that way." That evening she hung her winter wreath on the front door. Pine, red berries, a deep burgundy bough. She stepped back, took a photo with her phone, and posted it with a single caption, "Surviving isn't scary." The likes came quickly, mostly from neighbors, old library friends, people who'd known her before Dana learned the language of image control. By nightfall, her phone buzzed with a new message. Dana's name on the screen. "If you die alone, don't blame us." Ruth read it once, the corners of her mouth neither lifting nor falling. She set the phone face down on the table and let the house go quiet again. The cedar box sat on Ruth's kitchen table, its surface polished to a low glow under the lamplight. It was the size of a shoebox, heavier than it looked. She'd had the brass plate custom engraved. "Evie Reed, open when you turn 18. The letters caught the light like something waiting to be read aloud. Inside, each layer was at the bottom a flash drive containing videos, one for every birthday so far, and a few for ones that hadn't happened yet. Above that, envelopes of printed photos, Evie in her first snowsuit, grinning at a cake with her hands full of frosting, curled against Ruth's shoulder in the rocking chair. Between the stacks, Ruth had placed handwritten letters on thick stationery, telling stories that no filtered family album would preserve. The smell of lilacs in Ruth's garden, the song she'd sung to Dana in the apartment on the night she came home from the hospital, the feel of Evie's tiny palm against her cheek the first time she reached out. There was no anger in the letters, no accusations, just proof. When she closed the lid, the faint scent of cedar rose up, sharp, clean, enduring. She wrapped the box in plain brown paper, addressed it to Evie in Dana's care, and wrote "to be stored, not opened" across the top in black marker. At the post office, the clerk weighed it, glanced at the label, and slid it onto the conveyor without comment. The sound of the belt carrying it away felt like the beginning of a countdown no one else knew about. Afterward, Ruth walked straight to Ellie's office. On the desk between them sat a small envelope, holding a single brass key, the only way to open the box's lock. Ellie took it without question. "I'll keep it under seal," she said. "Not even a court order can force me to hand this over before the date." "That's the point," Ruth said. They went over one more piece of paperwork that day. Ruth's burial preferences. It was a short document, only a page, but the language was firm. No service, no announcement. Peace. She signed it with the same steady hand she'd used to sign every guardianship change, every trust document. The next day, Pastor Lowell came by. She showed him the duplicate of the box's contents, the way each item was placed with care. He ran a hand gently over the cedar lid. "What they threw away," he said quietly. "She'll find someday." Ruth nodded. "That's enough for me." 2 days later her birthday came. The day passed without calls from Dana or Miles. In the evening, a notification pinged on her phone. Dana's public post. A smiling photo from some summer long past, Dana's arm around Ruth's shoulders, both of them holding ice cream cones. The caption read, "Happy birthday to my mom. Wishing you joy and health." The comments rolled in. "You look so alike. So sweet. Family is everything." Ruth set the phone down without reacting. The silence in her living room was warmer than the noise online. The next morning, she found a package on her doorstep. Small, light, the handwriting on the label large and uneven. No return address. Inside, wrapped in a folded sheet of pink construction paper, was a crayon drawing, two stick figures hugging. One had short silver hair. The other had a bow in her hair, and a smile so big it pushed against the edges of the paper. No name, no message, but in the bottom corner, a small crooked heart. Ruth sat at the table, the drawing spread before her, and let her fingertips trace the waxy lines. The scent of cedar still lingered faintly in the air from the box she'd mailed days before. The crayon drawing lay on the table for 2 days before Ruth found the right place for it. She chose the piano in the front room, the one her husband had played on quiet winter nights, and slipped the picture into a simple walnut frame. Against the polished black wood, the crooked stick figures looked like they belonged to another world, one that couldn't be rewritten or deleted. The next morning, the doorbell rang. Ellie stood there, her wool coat still dusted with snow, a leather briefcase in hand. She followed Ruth into the kitchen and laid out a series of crisp bound documents. "These are the final copies," Ellie said. "Guardianship, trust, healthcare directives, all state approved, time locked and sealed. No changes without your direct consent, and certainly not after you're gone." Ruth flipped through the pages, the weight of the paper in her hands like holding bricks to a wall she'd built one stone at a time. "It's strange," she said quietly. "I thought I'd feel lighter when it was done, but it feels anchored." "That's because it's permanent," Ellie replied. "You've put something in place that will outlast every petty move she makes." After Ellie left, Ruth sat at her desk and pulled out a single sheet of cream stationery. She began writing in her careful looping hand. "Dear Evie, if this finds you, I did something right. Everything I've done has been for the day you're old enough to understand that love doesn't vanish just because someone tells you it's gone." She signed only her first name. No explanations, no dates. The letter went into an envelope and then into the cedar box duplicate she kept locked in her own safe. That evening her email pinged. The sender Dana. "Evie doesn't even remember you anymore." The words sat there, sharp and gleaming, meant to cut. Ruth read them twice, then clicked away without replying. She'd learned the most powerful answer was no answer at all. Instead she called Tomas. "I'm ready for the last amendment," she told him. An hour later she was in his office, the lamp casting a warm circle of light over the papers. Thomas adjusted his glasses and slid the form across the desk. "This one is the lock on the gate," he said. "It bars Dana from handling any estate matter. Ever, no loopholes, no appeals." Ruth read the clause slowly, each word a nail driven into place. Then she signed, the pen scratching decisively over the line. Thomas gathered the papers, his expression sober but tinged with quiet pride. "It's done. They're out forever." Outside, the street lamps threw long shadows across the snow, the air so cold it bit her lungs. When Ruth got home, she paused in the doorway of the piano room, the faint lamplight glancing off the frame that held Evie's drawing. The small crooked heart in the corner glowed like a coal, steady and alive. She rested her fingertips lightly against the glass, the paper cool beneath it. "I hugged her with everything I had," she whispered into the stillness. Just not how they understood. Somewhere deep inside, the last door closed, and behind it was not emptiness, but the quiet, unshakable empire she'd built for one small girl who would one day open it. They said she was dramatic. Ruth filed the calmest papers of her life. The teapot steamed gently on the oak table, the scent of Earl Grey curling into the quiet. 4 chairs, no extra plates, No overfilled serving dishes meant to impress. Just Ruth, Ellie, Tomas, and Pastor Lowell, the three people who had stood in her corner without condition. Ellie poured the tea while Tomas passed around the shortbread Ruth had baked that morning. They spoke in the easy rhythm of people who had nothing left to prove to each other. No talk of Dana, no rehashing of the fights. Laughter came in small, genuine bursts, the kind that didn't need to fill the room to feel whole. Her bungalow was warm, the baseboards ticking softly as the heat moved through them. On the shelves and mantel, every photograph was of Evie, her gap-toothed grin, the smudge of chocolate on her cheek at her second birthday, the tiny footprints from her first summer. Not a single picture of Dana remained. When the cups were half empty, Tomas reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a folder, placing it squarely in front of Ruth. "Here it is," he said. "A state closure preview. Final structure. Clean, airtight, unchallengeable." She opened it slowly, the paper cool under her fingertips. Page after page laid out what would happen after she was gone, where each asset went, which accounts fed into the trust, the locks on every possible door Dana might try to pry open. Ruth closed the folder with both hands, the gesture deliberate. "That's it then," she said. "That's it," Tomas confirmed. Ellie set down her cup. "You rewrote what motherhood looks like," she said. "Not for her, but for the one who mattered." The words landed like a benediction. Ruth nodded, the corners of her mouth lifting in a way that was more endurance than joy. After they left, she walked into her study. The fireproof box sat in its usual place against the far wall. She opened it, placed a fresh copy of the guardianship paper inside, and shut the lid. The click of the lock was soft, but final. In the evening, with the kettle whistling again, she pulled her knitting basket to the couch. The yarn was a deep, steady blue. She worked methodically, stitch by stitch, the quiet broken only by the occasional sigh of wind against the windows. By the time the clock in the hall struck 9, she had finished the last pair of mittens she would ever make. They were adult-sized, the cuffs long enough to tuck under a coat sleeve. On the inside edge of one cuff, she sewed a small cloth tag, "For someday." She set them beside the cedar box duplicate in the safe. Her phone buzzed from the coffee table. The number was unfamiliar. No caller ID. A message icon blinked. She tapped it open, the screen filled with the slightly shaky frame of a child, holding a phone too close to her own face. Blonde curls, bright eyes. "Evie." "Grandma," the little voice said, breathless with excitement. "I saw your picture." The video ended. Ruth sat very still, the sound of the wind outside suddenly sharper, the mittens warm in her lap. She said Ruth looked scary. Ruth made sure the truth looked beautiful. The video played in the quiet of the bungalow, the light from the screen catching the fine lines around Ruth's eyes. Evie's face filled the frame, close enough that every eyelash was visible, her voice tumbling out in that breathless, unfiltered way only a child could manage. "Grandma, I saw your picture." Ruth didn't cry from sadness. The tears that welled now were born of something sturdier, pride. Proof that even after months of silences, gatekeeping and legal walls, some part of their connection had survived. The child had recognized her. She replayed the video once, twice, then set the phone down and moved to her desk. The cedar scent from the duplicate box in the safe still lingered faintly in the air, mingling with the chamomile steeping on the table. She pulled out a fresh sheet of cream stationery, the kind she reserved for the things that mattered, and slid it into a blank envelope. Her pen moved without hesitation. "You were always safe with me." She wrote nothing more. No explanations, no long goodbyes. It was the sort of truth that needed no decoration. Outside the window, snow was falling in slow, deliberate flakes, each one catching the street lamp's glow before settling onto the untouched lawn. There were no Christmas lights strung along her porch, no wreath in the window, no sound of car doors or voices, just the soft hum of the heater, and the faint ticking of the clock in the hall. Ruth glanced at the framed photo of Evie on her desk, one from the early days, her cheeks full, a smear of chocolate across her grin. She smiled. not with longing but with the quiet knowledge that she had done the work to keep the girl's future untouchable. She slipped the note into the envelope, pressed the flap down and sealed it with her initials in blue ink. The weight of it in her hand felt out of proportion to its size. In the living room, the tea waited beside the drawing Evie had mailed, the two stick figures hugging, the small crooked heart in the corner. Ruth set the envelope beside them, aligning the edges as if building a small private altar. She sat for a long moment, her hands resting on the table's edge. "I held her," she whispered into the stillness. "Just not the way they wanted." Somewhere outside, a car passed slowly, its tires whispering over the snow. The sound faded, leaving the bungalow wrapped in its own hush. She looked once more at the envelope, the photo, the drawing. The three of them together told the truth better than any courtroom could. They were the arms Dana had tried to take, and they had endured in another form. In her mind, Ruth pictured Evie at 18, older, taller, opening the cedar box with careful hands, reading the letters, watching the videos, understanding at last that love had been there all along, protected in law and in memory. Ruth's smile deepened. It wasn't the hug she'd been denied in the driveway, the living room or the doorway. It was the one she had built across years, sewn into quilts, recorded in birthday messages, sealed into trusts, and folded into the quiet persistence of not giving up. They had banned her from hugging the child. She had left the child a future no one could touch, sealed with the arms they tried to take.